Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much to Jupiter and Benny for allowing us to share those great videos with all of you today. We are going to jump right into our panel discussion. I'm going to do a couple quick intros, or three quick intros of our panelists, including our moderator, Kristen Jeffers, and then we will get started. One last thing before I do that, I'm going to quickly close out the National Endowment for the Arts portion of the event today by mentioning, as I think Jen Hughes from the NEA mentioned in the chat a little while ago, there's an opportunity for funding through the NEA's Our Town program, a program that has funded many of the projects you heard discussed earlier today. The deadline is coming up August 4th, I believe. I encourage you all to look into that to fund any of the great projects you're working on related to cultural displacement or any number of other projects involving artists working on aspects of community development. So with that, I'll start by introducing Kristen. Kristen Jeffers is one of the first people to bring the concept of Black urbanism to the internet and social media way back in 2010, after purchasing and launching the Black Urbanist, which in its 11th year continues to be a resource for Black urbanism, the intersection of feminism, and queer and trans life. She's the author of the forthcoming A Black Urbanist Journey to a Queer Feminist Future, memoir/manifesto of Black queer feminist urbanism, and creator of the K. Jeffers Index for Black Queer Feminist Urbanism, guide, measure, and data center to assess the thrivance of Black queer feminist urbanist people globally, and curator of the Black Queer Feminist Urbanist Book Canon and School. Kristen will moderate our panel today. We're also really excited to have both Jupiter and Benny joining us today. Jupiter Peraza works as a program associate at the Transgender District in San Francisco's Tenderloin, the world's first legally recognized transgender district. Jupiter is a DACA recipient and undocumented trans woman whose work focuses on immigrant rights and voter mobilization. She led a national phone bank program for President Biden and VP Harris at Manny's, great community space if any of you are located in the Bay Area. It's a community and civic and political space in the Mission District in San Francisco, where she organized a national text bank that sent over 1 million text messages and mobilized her community to write 25,000 letters to the swing states of Florida and Michigan during the 2020 election. And finally, last but not least, you just heard him perform. Artist Benny Starr, native of South Carolina's Lowcountry, creates music that tells unique stories about the richness, history, and resilience of Southern Black culture and community. His most recent releases, The Land and Restoration, highlight the many injustices faced by Black farmers and were released in tandem with introduction of the Black Farmers Act 2020, which directs the Department of Agriculture to provide assistance to address historical discrimination and disparities. Benny became the U.S. Water Alliance's first artist in residence in 2020, and now serves as the Arts and Culture Senior Fellow, integrating artistic approaches and cultural strategies to help advance and accelerate our ability to achieve a sustainable water future for all. Thank you all for being here today. Really looking forward to this discussion. I'll hand things over to Kristen to get things started. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today and for sticking with us as we transition into our panel discussion part. So I don't have a nice little video to come and introduce my part, but for those of you who are aware of my work, there are so many elements. So when I was asked to bring a little bit of an introduction to what we're talking about today, I decided to lean in on what I've done for now 12 years in doing this work, which is literally talk about how this affects me personally. Also, this is my contact information. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kristen E. Jeffers. You can still follow me at Black Urbanist on all socials, email me, and of course, go to the website. And I'm going to actually highlight one particular piece of the website I'm going to introduce in these introduction remarks. So in case you wanted a little bit more about me, I'm Kristen. I self-identify as a millennial Black queer feminist urbanist. I also have noted my kind of land affiliations, as well as, of course, I'm coming to you on the historic unceded land of the Piscataway as well. And all of those things have something to do with how I approach this work that I do. I also wanted to include a photograph of myself holding my art form. I've been a fiber artist pre-pandemic, but really during the pandemic, this was something that I held on to in addition to my writing and in addition to shaping my writing and work in this way. And so it's really exciting to also have more time to talk with and learn from our other two panelists. I'll also be putting forth some questions for you today, but in lieu of that, I just wanted to kind of give you all kind of some more context. So for me, thinking about this has been a childhood thing. It was seeing this metro map, and it specifically included a DC metro map from when I was like growing up. Now, this is probably teenage years for me, early 2000s, with the original, almost the original system. So if you're looking for the silver line, we didn't have a silver line back then. Purple line was barely planned. And of course, there's some other things here on this map that aren't here that don't affect me today. But I started this work because I've been fascinated with how neighborhoods work. My father brought home maps for me, and like many millennials and Gen Xers, this bird is very much a part of my childhood and reasoning as to why I was involved in thinking about what places are doing it. And you're going to notice a theme in my remarks today where there's a lot of imagery inside of grocery stores, because that's also a big part of why I've been asking myself the question of, well, I'm in kind of in the same place. Unless I move by choice, well, why is my neighborhood moving away from me? So many of you all remember this moment with the Let's Move campaign. It's been a minute since I've shopped in this Safeway in downtown DC, but that's there. And of course, I wanted to highlight, of course, for those of you who are, or many of you are aware, the origins of Sesame Street. And at least for me, it absolutely did work in helping with literacy, helping me with seeing other cultures and celebrating inner city lives. Now, of course, I'm from North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina. That inner city looked a little bit different for me. And this is why when I was thinking about cultural displacement and gentrification, I was like, okay, this looks different for me. Um, this is a grocery store, former Winn-Dixie location that was built in the early 1990s, vacated by the early 2000s. Now, right next to it, those of you who are aware of the geography of Greensboro, this is Southwest Greensboro. Any of my North Carolinians that are on the chat today, if you've driven through here on I-85, you may have gone to the water park that's still very much active behind this grocery store. And some of you may have not realized that this was active at one point. Some of you may also remember the Kmart that was there. So it was just this weird idea of building things that are new. And this wasn't new. I am also want to highlight a GIF illustration I made of maps created by David Gwynn, a colleague of mine who created a site, Cafeteria.com, independent of their work that they do around libraries and information science. And they hand drew this, and I just spliced the GIFs together in Photoshop. They hand drew these moving maps and various grocery chains from 1930 through 1970. But for me, I picked up watching these cultural phenomena happen in the 1990s, 2000s, and even in the 20 teens. I noted as I was pulling up David's site that one of our favorite grocery stores that we shop at, a Harris Teeter location, has closed down. And of course, one here in DC near me just also closed. So this is something that's been going on. And then when you think about housing, my family has pretty much lived, most of my family still lives within the Piedmont Triad region of North Carolina, with a few exceptions. Technically, the homes that my parents have lived in were not on our HELOC maps for Greensboro, because Greensboro grew later. Not that we weren't growing because of our legacy to textile mills, but I wanted to highlight this image of Smith Homes, which was built actually for white families. It's pretty much all predominantly Black and other people of color families now, such that in the home that my parents purchased, it was right down the street from this area. There was a residential covenant, but it wasn't because of the redlining map. So even there are different narratives, and that's another reason I call this a personal history, because there's so many different narratives around how our culture is manifest. I want to encourage you all listening today, and I've already seen it in the chat, I've already heard it in the Q&A, to continue to document how your worlds have changed and document the things that you need, and also use the examples we're bringing here on this panel today to encourage you for doing that. And so, yeah, I'm that person where those homes, I'm getting texts about them. One of my parents' homes is worth over $200,000, which is mind blowing since we did not pay for that much for it. And of course, I'm here in DC trying to figure out how to afford a home with my partner. It may not look like this, as we well know the dynamics are what they are. And then it's just, this is one moment that even I, being in a very privileged position, that even though we're in a virtual environment, we're in this pandemic environment, we are here today. We have made this time and we've been able to make this time. And many of us are in positions where we may not feel gentrification, but in other ways we do. Many of us are active in this work because we want to hold on and we want to actively continue to participate and benefit from changes that are happening. We ourselves grow and we're growing and we want to be there. And so, of course, I've gotten through this. And of course, I want to highlight, of course, one key place that is still very much in Washington, D.C. I had the privilege of actually coming in and talking with Miss Virginia Ali a few, like, honestly, I think it was about a couple weeks ago. I got to come by Ben's Chili Bowl, the original one. They are still here. And this is one key example of where something that means something to the Black community of Washington, D.C., even on a stretch of land that this should have not been here, but it's here and people have supported it and it's a place to come. And I am 100% in belief that if you're here on this call today and if you're in this collective of people doing this work, whether it's through eventually down the line reparations or other things that will help your community stay together, these things will be here for you. So I wanted to put this picture here for encouragement, in addition to continuing to tell a little bit of my personal story. And so one of the things I did, and I'm not going to go through all of these because I want to get to my other panelists and give them time to share their stories and answer some questions. But for me to ground myself, and the use of the golden is also a significant. I'm going to get too deep into the significance of that, but those of you who know the significance of gold and why I might choose gold to highlight what this work is for me personally, you know. But basically, I created my own personal manifesto. And of course, I want to encourage you all both together in tandem as you're making note of where things are moving and such to do so. And so, once again, I just want to put up here why this matters for folks who are here to learn. Why does this matter? Why are we bothering to have this conversation? Why is this even now we're having these conversations at the federal level, which is a great thing to do because we need these conversations there. You know, it's easy to bring things to a space. Like I just put an example up here, bringing games and instruments, food and objects to sell, putting something in an empty field, putting something on the table. You know, it's people powered. It's often low cost because it's whatever you have on hand. But building that permanent homes, building those community centers, organizing transit centers, that can take years. And of course, we live in a world of climate change and natural disasters, and some of us have lost our cultural assets because of those things. So it's the things that we hold in our hands are the things we're able to take to the places we are sometimes forced by nature to go to, or unfortunately, other elements that we're hoping to push back against make us go to. So of course, I'm gonna actually go into the chat and link to hopefully this won't mess with any of the movement of the well, I'm gonna post some of this in the chat, like the definitions of Black, queer, feminist, urbanist, and I'll also submit my slides for those of you who want to look more into this as well. And I apologize for the change in the colorings. I copied this directly off of my own personal site. And so those whys, in addition to those definitions that you just saw about how I approach my work, how I see those labels that I've given myself and how I define them, you know, these are for those whys. And then two more and more and more. And of course, I'm going to include this so that you all can read through this yourself and you can be inspired to create, write it down. Of course, I do come from the Black church tradition that says write the vision and make it plain. And so this is my inspiration for doing so. And so I'm going to now, of course, I wanted to highlight one more example before I turn this over to my other panelists of the work that they've been able to do. Some of it you already saw in the videos preceding our moment right now. But here in DC, this headline showed up in the Washington Post just a few days ago of Black-owned solutions to DC's food deserts. Of course, I want to encourage attendees, continuing to encourage the work that Smart Growth America is doing. Of course, folks who are coming to Smart Growth America to get technical assistance and help with building out an infrastructure of solutions that don't assume that those we are serving can't create for ourselves, that sometimes all we need is like encouragement, mentorship, funds. And so with that, I'm going to end my set of slides. I'm going to stop my screen share here, and I'm going to invite my panelists to step up and share more of how they have created this process. So Jupiter, I'm going to turn it over to you. This will be a great seg for you to talk about the wonderful work you've been doing at the Transgender District.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and a great segue into what I will be discussing. So let me just share my presentation really quickly. All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Jupiter Peraza, and I am with the Transgender District, the world's first legally recognized transgender district. I am Director of Social Justice and Empowerment Initiatives at the Transgender District. One little minor detail in regards to my bio. A little bit more about me. As Ben was mentioning, I joined the Transgender District at the beginning of 2021. But prior to working at the Transgender District, I had the wonderful opportunity for working for a civic space in the Mission District in the heart of San Francisco. And in the civic space over the span of 2.5 years, where I served as Director of Community Initiatives, we put on nightly programming on a wide range of topics, ranging from local politics to state politics and even national politics. We did many events around civics, community organizing, so on and so forth. So my time at Manny's, which is the name of the civic space that I am talking about, my time at Manny's really allowed me to garner a very solid and cohesive understanding of the community in which I was a part of and the community that I worked with and worked for. So without the knowledge that I gained from my job at Manny's, I would not have been able to do most of the work that I do as Director of Social Justice Initiatives at the Transgender District. And some of the programs and initiatives that I lead at the district are historic preservation initiatives, social justice and policy efforts, community engagement, like the Transgender District's Community Advisory Council, which I will speak about later in the presentation. But I wanted to speak about the mission of the Transgender District. And as you see here listed on this slide, the mission of the Transgender District is to create an urban environment that fosters rich history, culture, legacy, and empowerment of trans people in our roots to the Southeastern Tenderloin neighborhood. The Transgender Districts aim to stabilize and economically empower the the trans community through the ownership of homes, businesses, historic and cultural sites, and safe community spaces. I have included a map of the Transgender District, and as you see here, the map encompasses 6 blocks in the Southeastern Tenderloin, in a corridor south of Market, down 6th Street. And a major portion of the Trans District is located in the Tenderloin. And the Tenderloin and the history of the Tenderloin is incredibly critical in understanding why the trans community is tethered to the Tenderloin District in San Francisco. The Tenderloin District for over 100 years has been regarded as the vice district of San Francisco. And what I mean by that is that since the early 1900s, the Tenderloin has carried this image and this reputation in which vice activities like gambling and prostitution and drinking were very prominent in this neighborhood. This is also a neighborhood in which many folks that were coming to San Francisco flocked to. And the reason why is because the Tenderloin has a high concentration of SROs, which stands for single room occupancy hotels, in which folks lived in these hotels, folks that were single, that were unmarried, folks that didn't have any family members, any children. So this was a great place for queer history and for the queer community to thrive. But now I would like to touch on the areas of work of the Transgender District. The first one being tenant protections, economic and workforce development, arts and culture, cultural heritage conservation, land use, cultural competency, and trans empowerment. As you can see on the right-hand side, you see the Black Trans Lives Matter mural, which is at the intersection of Turk and Taylor Streets, which is right on the heart of the Transgender District. And in this intersection, actually, this is where the Compton's Cafeteria riots of 1966 occurred. And you might ask, what are the Compton's Cafeteria riots? So the Compton's Cafeteria riots of 1966 happened 3 years before Stonewall, and they are regarded as the first documented uprising of Black and brown, trans and queer individuals in the United States. On the northwestern side of this intersection, so on this building that you see here, this is where Compton's Cafeteria was located. And Compton's Cafeteria, which was a 24-hour diner during the 60s, was a gathering place for many folks that were performers, drag queens, folks that lived in the neighborhood. They went to Compton's Cafeteria to gather. Well, one night in August in 1966, there was a scuffle between one of the drag queens and a police officer. And the drag queen is said to have thrown a hot cup of coffee at the police officer. And doing so, all hell broke loose. And soon enough, there were hundreds of folks outside on this intersection fighting with the police. And that went on to catalyze other acts of resistance across the country. But this specific act in San Francisco really changed the quality of life for many queer and trans folks in the city. As you see here, once again, the Black Trans Lives Matter mural. I explain on the left-hand side that it is very much of a visual reminder of what neighborhood we are in. Now I would like to move on to historic preservation. So, as Director of Social Justice Initiatives, I have really narrowed my focus on historic preservation. And you might ask why? Well, as I mentioned, the Compton's Cafeteria was one of them. And the Compton's Cafeteria, it's one example, one of many that account how rich San Francisco is in transgender history. However, most of trans history is oral history. There is not enough written accounts of trans individuals, trans events, and it's very telling of how society has regarded the existence and the validity of trans people in modern day society. So the reason why I've been so focused in trans history is because once we are able to memorialize and honor trans history, we pave a path forward in creating bridges of connection, of being able to understand one another, where we come from, to understand and to realize that we have more in common than what we have, or how different we are. Some of the historic preservation efforts that have been promoted by the Trans District, the Turk and Taylor Streets intersection has just been initiated a landmark via the San Francisco Historic Preservation Commission, so the local historic commission. As you saw previously, the Black Trans Lives Matter mural on the Turk and Taylor Streets intersection, once again, that landmark. Transgender History Month, which we were able to pass last year. As you see in the picture in the right, the one in purple is Mayor Breed. In this ceremony, she signed the proclamation designating August as Transgender History Month. August, because of its connections to the Compton's Cafeteria riots of 1966. And also, there's no exact date of when the Compton's Cafeteria riots happened in August. And because there is no date, it's important to honor the entire month. But also, the reason why there's no exact date is because following the riots, the police department tried to erase any account of the riot occurring in hopes that it didn't inspire another one in the future. But doing so is eliminating trans history, which is why all of the efforts that we're doing are very important for the district. And last but not least, our Riot Party, which is our annual celebration that commemorates the Compton's Cafeteria riots. And the Riot Party is a great way for our community to come together, to celebrate, to be in community. We are planning a great Riot Party this year with queer performers and artists, musicians, DJs, so on and so forth. We really see our Riot Party as the beacon of cultural magnetism, in which folks come to this Riot Party to engage with the history and the culture that is so prominent and so rich in the city. I also would like to talk briefly about the Safer Taylor Street project. As you see here, this is the Taylor Street corridor, which is right after the Turk and Taylor Street intersection. What the Safer Taylor Street project is that it's going to bring beautification to this portion of the Trans District. The sidewalks are going to be expanded. More trees are going to be added. There are going to be trans-colored crosswalks. There is going to be blocks, not necessarily blocks, but there are going to be benches. And surrounding the benches are going to be plaques of trans figures and events. And we've been working with San Francisco's Department of Public Works in making sure that we are included in the planning of this beautification process. It is very important for us to be as involved with the projects that happen in our district. And we believe that it is also important to make sure that we are making use of the placemaking opportunities that we have as a cultural district. And thus far, it's been very fun to plan this out with San Francisco Department of Public Works. And we are very grateful that they are very receptive to working with us. So that is awesome. And we're looking for it to be completed in 2024. So the last thing that I would like to touch on is redistricting. Redistricting just concluded in San Francisco over the last few months. And, you know, the Tenderloin is located in District 6. Well, it was located in District 6 of San Francisco. And District 6 witnessed a population growth of over 30% over the last 10 years, which prompted the San Francisco's redistricting task force to focus on District 6 and splitting it in order to make sure that it was being equalized to the rest of the city. But doing so doesn't take into account San Francisco's racist housing zoning policies, in which most of the growth and much of the housing that's being built is being built on the eastern side of the San Francisco Peninsula. And every time that redistricting comes around, what happened in the previous redistricting process is going to continue to happen. And what happened at the end is that the Transgender District was the only of the 9 cultural districts that currently exist in San Francisco. It was the only one to be split in half. As you see here, this orange few blocks, this one and this is the Transgender District. And the line that runs diagonal, this is Market Street. So this is where it was divided. So up here, it is now District 5, and down here, it is District 6. The pink that you see here is the Soma Pilipinas Cultural District. And what you see down here, as well as this, is the LGBT Leather District. All of them were kept intact, and the Trans District was the only one that was cut in half. You know, many folks fail to consider the impacts of redistricting, but I always like to make sure that I am thinking ahead in terms of how will redistricting impact the Tenderloin and thus the Trans District, because the Tenderloin and the Trans District are inherently connected. They have the same history, the same socioeconomic diversity. So when you think of this and what will happen, you know, the vote and the voice of folks that are living in the Tenderloin, which is the most marginalized neighborhood in all of San Francisco, their voices are being diluted by those that live in more affluent portions of the city. So with this result, the Trans District has been very attentive to the short-term impacts of redistricting, but also keeping in mind the long-term impacts. As I mentioned, there are currently beautification efforts happening in the Tenderloin. And it makes you wonder, if beautification is happening, what does the city have in mind for this neighborhood? Does the city want this neighborhood to change? If it changes and a new makeup of residents comes into this neighborhood that do not understand the history or the community that is already there, what will happen? Who will be impacted? Of course, there's going to be displacement, but how can we prevent it? So those are the questions that redistricting brought to the forefront. You know, we are very excited to continue our work with other cultural districts in San Francisco to make sure that, you know, we don't feel the impacts of redistricting as they are intended to be by those that do not really favor keeping cultural heritage intact. All right, and if anybody wants to learn more about the Transgender District, I suggest you all go to the transgenderdistrict.com.
Thank you for that presentation, Jupiter. Thank you, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with everyone today. My name is Benny Starr. I'm a hip hop artist from the low country of South Carolina. If you give me 1 second here, let me share my presentation with you. Once again, I'm a hip hop artist from South Carolina, the low country of South Carolina, small unincorporated town called Pineville, South Carolina, in that tri-county area of Charleston, South Carolina, Dorchester County, Charleston County, and Berkeley County. Recent filmmaker, and I was the inaugural artist in residence for U.S. Water Alliance. I currently serve as their Arts and Culture Senior Fellow. At this point in my work, I'm really focused on process. And I'm thinking about many of the projects that I've been grateful enough to have an opportunity to support and collaborate within, from a water album, which was recorded live at Charleston Music Hall in South Carolina 1 week after Hurricane Florence nearly destroyed Charleston, South Carolina. It avoided us. It turned north at the last minute. But after that, we were able to come together and use water as a contextualizing theme to talk about things like culture and race and the history, Gullah Geechee people utilizing sounds and cultural touch points to express ourselves in the way that we wanted to express ourselves down there right after that, to determine what joy and expression looked like for us. Work with Policy Link and the Water Equity and Climate Resilience Caucus, the work with Acres of Ancestry and the Cancel Pig for Debt campaign that worked to address and support a popular education program that really illuminated all the injustices by the USDA against Black farmers, as long as Black farmers have been in existence. And a lot of these things spoke to me because it allowed me to lean into process over product. The process is very important. What our keynote touched on really hit me. I come from a small town in the South, unincorporated town, and a part of our family legacy is manipulation, white manipulation out of our land. And what was very appealing to me about the residency that I recently completed with U.S. Water Alliance is that it was so focused on process over product. In a lot of ways, I feel like we have become a society that is obsessed with product versus process, but I'm not a product, and I don't ever want to be treated as a product. I am in process, as we are all in process, and leaning into the process helps me to ask these questions about how are we in relationship with each other? How are we in relationship with collaborators? How are we in relationship with the communities that we serve? How are we in relationship with ourselves in our own work? And what I wanted to do today was touch on the focus project that I was able to create during my residency with the U.S. Water Alliance, which is really focused on process and a way of thinking. How do we engage one another? What does thoughtful partnership with artists look like? What does thoughtful partnership with community look like? And the key word being partnership, collaboration, co-creation. And that project is called the Creative Exploration of Power, Purpose, and Joy. Again, a creative engagement that draws on that artistic process. My own artistic process, which I found during the pandemic, was there were many obstacles for me to perform my artistic process in the way that I'm normally performing. I'm normally on stage performing, being in relationship with the audience. I'm normally in the studio with musicians and bass players and drummers or producers co-creating. But when that came to a halt, I had to be really reflective and introspective about my own process and how that could continue to serve, how it can continue to push culture forward, preserve culture, and fight against the terrors of white supremacy as we think about building with communities, serving communities, and doing things that actually don't displace people, but allow them to not only be resilient, but to be prosperous. And these elements of this creative exploration of power, purpose, and joy are rooted in my own artistic process. Again, helping us to embrace the importance of what it means to be in relationship, what it means to have thoughtful collaboration, and what it means to move with intention through moments of transformation and change, which it seems like we are constantly in those kinds of moments. There are four guiding principles in this way of thinking. Nature and environment, our connection with our natural world, our connection with our environment, and our environment encompassing one another. This is a guiding principle: justice and equity. I love when we start to talk about justice, and I love when we start to talk about equity. And I also have to always be sure that we're talking about justice too, because there has been so many historical wrongs and historical terrors and discriminations and things that have happened. How do we repair that while also making room for people to have equitable access in an equitable state in what we do going forward? Recognition of labor. For me and my family, my race as a Black person in the South, that is always going to be very important to me. And as an artist, that recognition of my labor will always be very important to me. And cultivation of joy. The ability to cultivate joy in our traditions, in our culture, the things that we do to sustain ourselves. I think those four guiding principles are very important in how we think about these seven phases or these seven elements in this process. So the first element in this process, again, all based on my own artistic process, is a commitment to pre-production. Then we have the art of crate digging. We have the cipher, which is a participatory process of rhythm, commentary, and critique. Then we have building collective creative direction, how we foster synergy amongst each other, how we embrace improvisation, and how we honor the work. Each of these phases are linear, but they are also iterative of one another. So commitment to pre-production can very much so be tapped into while we're crate digging, while we're ciphering, while we're fostering synergy, and while we're embracing improvisation. All of these things work together with one another, again, based on my own artistic process. A commitment to pre-production begins with a lot of self-awareness, I believe, in self-discovery. Taking time to identify who we are and what we are before the work begins, which is something that's very important for me and has informed a lot of my work and collaborations with different issues and with different projects. I want to be able to be fully invested in that co-creation. I want my collaborators, whether it's a community I serve, a group that I'm collaborating with, to be able to identify their individual needs in order to even imagine their wants in this project so we can all have buy-in in this work that we're doing. I think that's incredibly important. And after that, we'll have the art of crate digging. Now, crate digging has been an important way for hip hop artists and musicians to acknowledge and appreciate all of the work that has come before us. Sampling is a huge thing in hip hop. It's the way we honor the work that's come before us. It's the way we honor jazz artists and soul and gospel in order to innovate forward. So when I think about crate digging, I think about really having a critical examination of our history, not just a critical understanding of the history, but being able to feel that history, that offers us a sense of place and a grounds for understanding the context in which we're looking to work, the context in which we're looking to serve. And it gives us a really powerful and sound foundational platform to build upon. So the art of crate digging is a very important part of this process and of this work. And after that comes the cipher. Now the cipher is, again, it's a participatory process of rhythm, commentary, and critique. Coming out of hip hop culture, the cipher is a method for spontaneous group co-creation. So you got MCs, DJs, breakdancers gathered in a circle. Even that cipher, that circle is protection. That circle is protection. It allows everybody to understand we're all coming into the cipher on equal footing. We're going to share the mic. We create that rhythm by sharing the mic, by passing it along. And the principles that are rooted in the cipher extend even past hip hop. I think as a grandson of a Gullah woman in the low country of South Carolina, I think back to the ring shouts. I think back to all these different elements of jazz and gospel and spirituals that we still build out of and build on top of. That culture that still is able to proliferate, even from when my grandmother was born in 1920 in Pineville, South Carolina, to me currently engaging in the practice of my work in 2022. And the cipher is essential for commentary. It's essential for critique. It's essential for dissent. What are we rooted in? Are we allowing ourselves to be critiqued? Are we allowing ourselves to learn? Are we allowing ourselves to fail and then refine, which is one of the beautiful things I love about being an artist, the ability to define who we are and to create, to fail in order to push forward. Again, building collective creative direction. It helps us contextualize and imagine beyond the status quo, bringing a full range of ideas and experiences in various forms of expertise, artistic, cultural, scientific, economic, engineering, bringing that all to the circle so that we can understand what we're trying to do and crystallize a shared vision that we have. Fostering synergy is a very important part of this process. It helps everybody realize their role relative to the other collaborators in that co-creation. Alignment doesn't mean that we all have to be exactly the same. Rarely we are. But it does let us know that we have inherent value and we can recognize that value. And then we can find commonalities, foundational commonalities, identified challenges and new ideas. So again, that we can push forward, build on culture, and innovate, unlocking whatever potential that we have for the destination we're trying to get to. Embracing improvisation is a very important part of the artistic process, in my experience. I think to Miles Davis recording the score to The Elevator to Gallows in 1958, when they just played the film on the screen and allowed the band that he was with to just play what they felt. I think improvisation is something that we need to lean into a little bit more. We need to have space for the mystery and the things that will happen spontaneously. I think it teaches us to embrace not only mistakes and frustrations and failure, but how to rebound from it and not just respond to those obstacles, but also to be visionary in preparation of the obstacles that we know we're going to face in the future. And the last element of this process, again, all of these elements are linear, but they're also iterative of one another. Honoring the work. How do we honor the work as a part of that process? Collectively, we get to determine what is the way that we honor that work. It's an opportunity for solutions, exploration, recognition, appreciation. It gives us a chance to speak into the world how we value ourselves, each other, the work that we've done. Do we re-up that work? Do we refine it? Do we double down? Do we step away and allow those co-creators or those collaborators to now be in a better position that isn't dependent on us being present, but we're able to step back into more of a supportive role and a collective role. But this process is something that we often skip over, but it's really important to honor the work, how we reflect and how we build upon the transformation. Lastly, when talking about this way of thinking or this approach to a creative exploration of power, purpose, and joy, three of the things that I think we often don't get enough of, but we need all three of them. The goal is to create something new. I find myself sometimes in places that I have to remove myself from because it is just being more dialogue when really the need I have as an artist is to always create something new, whether that's a new way of thinking, a new reality for people, a new way of sustainability, a new way of being in relationship. That is the work. And I think that's the value of the artistic process that goes beyond simply the product or what we create. But there's immense value in the processes we employ, the culture that we are born out of, and the way in which we question constantly how we're in relationship with one another.
All right, folks. We thank you, Benny, for your remarks. Thank you, Jupiter, for yours. We just have a little bit of Q&A time. So I'm looking in the comments. And so I'm going to ask Jupiter, I'm going to ask you a specific question. And then Benny, I'm also going to ask you a specific question. So we can balance that out with our little bit of time we have left here today. So first, Jupiter, the question that was directed to you from an audience member. To speak a little bit more about the Know Our Place program that's on the website, the Transgender District website, that it looks like a great intersection of preservation, community, and art. So if you want to speak more about that particular program.
Yes, I am very glad that someone brought up the Know Our Place campaign. And the Know Our Place campaign is a public awareness campaign that the Transgender District launched last year. And we worked with a San Francisco-based company to put up a billboard and also put up other billboards and other images on the subway station. So Muni and BART, mostly the stations that are located within the Tenderloin and within the Transgender District. And with this public awareness campaign, we definitely wanted to bring in a fresh perspective into trans narratives, into trans personal stories. Most often, with the trans community, what we see in media and what we see happening around us is very negative and very pessimistic. And folks have this idea of trans people that is not very clear. It is not very true and honest. And with the public awareness campaign, we wanted to present this opportunity for the general public to see, listen, trans people are artists. They are musicians, they're culinary artists, they are community organizers, they are business owners, so on and so forth. And that was the premise of the public awareness campaign. And the public awareness campaign, we've also put it throughout the Transgender District as well. Cultural districts in San Francisco were able to make use of flag poles, and we are able to put up banners within the jurisdiction of the cultural district. And with the public awareness campaign, we've been doing that. But we've also created a web domain for folks to visit. I see somebody has put in the link for the Know Our Place campaign. Thank you so much about that. But please read the text within the Know Our Place campaign. It was also an effort to say, listen, trans people are here. They have been all along, and we are not going anywhere. And that was obviously the premise of Know Our Place. So if you have time to check that out, please do. I was one of the individuals that participated in it, and it was so beautiful. It was something that was created by trans people for trans people.
All right. Thank you, Jupiter, for that answer. Benny, I want to ask you now, I'm going to combine a few of the questions I've seen that have been kind of geared towards what you've been talking about. One, how do you integrate your interpretations of hip hop and these different measures of hip hop with all the variations that have shown up? I know in the comments, some folks have talked about the graffiti culture and some of those other pieces that may not be necessarily where your interpretation, place-based interpretation of it, very much part of the movement. And if you want to speak a little bit more as to how your work around climate change and water has infused this project and your work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I love for artists to have their agency. Graffiti, pillars of hip hop. I think I was trying to make the 10 minutes, make the most of my 10 minutes, and my friends are gonna beat me over the head for leaving out graffiti. Like these are pillars of hip hop. MC and b-boying, graffiti artists, MC freestyle and MC. There's so many pillars of the culture, and this is just a way of, for me, a way of expounding upon my own process that I employ. Graffiti artists will have their own processes. Dancers will have their own processes. Visual artists of all sorts and varieties. Dramatic theater artists will have their own processes. My goal with being really reflective about my own process that is really informed by where I'm from, from the low country of South Carolina, the history that my family has had to face, the experiences that I've had in South Carolina is hopefully to challenge people to find more ways to thoughtfully partner with artists and not just be obsessed with the final product that they create, but to really be able to unlock a whole new world that is really waiting to be unlocked by really leaning into their process and being able to partner with them in meaningful ways and thoughtful ways that also give us insight into their lived experience and the cultures that have produced them. During my work with U.S. Water Alliance, one of the things that I was adamant about was that, I don't want to be the guitarist that you place by the window to play guitar while everybody eats. I don't want to do that. I don't want arts to be siloed. I want to be in every meeting. I want to be in this meeting about greenhouse gas emissions, utility leaders. I want to be in this meeting when you're talking to the private sector about these different reducing carbon emissions. I want to be everywhere so that I can be able to listen, to learn, to do what art is often meant to do, which is to be very subversive and speak truth to power and also disrupt. So then we can begin to evaluate what culture looks like even within this organization, because that will undoubtedly inform the work that is outward of this organization and how we impact culture and communities that we're looking to serve or looking to partner with or looking to collaborate with, but really, really starting from that initial focal point of who am I before the work begins? What are we before the work begins? And allowing that same question to be asked by the communities that you're looking to serve and the people you're looking to partner with, because that is going to have a huge bearing on what a collaboration or what a project or what the equitable outcomes of that project will even begin to look like.
Yeah, great answer. And since we do have a little smidgen of time left, I want to pose this to all of us, and I'll answer it before I let y'all answer it. But to the folks that are like us, who are doing frontline work, where we're organizing communities, we're organizing, like we're making sure that we still exist in the world and people know that, hey, we exist. And of course, the weight of that and all the compoundments of that, and especially adding on the pandemic and all the things that have brought on the pandemic has brought on with us. What are the things you're doing, not just for your own self-care, but also cultivating community care? And I'll answer this in that I still do, like, I don't do a lot outside, but I mask up and I go to my yarn meetups. And then I have like certain things I make sure I keep in the house to eat, because that's important. It's important to be nutritious and nurtured and have my people around me. And of course my partner supports me and I support her. So take a moment and share, for both of you, what are those things that you do for your self-care and your community care that are kind of personal, the things we don't always think about when we're having a urban planning conversation about these things? Whoever wants to go first.
For me, I'll go first. For me, I like to get out in nature. I like to get out in nature because I spend a lot of time in nature. I'm lucky enough to be where I live is near a nature preserve, near a lake. I like to spend a lot of time there. I love my music. I love this virtual background that we have, so y'all can't see my vinyl wall necessarily, but a lot of time, a lot of conversation with friends who are able to come over. We talk, we storytell, we listen to music, um, and we just create a vulnerable space where we can actually be open with each other, and we can talk about what it is we're trying to do, how we can support each other, and movement. For me, movement in my body every morning, just long walks, time for me to think, time for me to meditate, and reaching out and calling people, calling people, and being able to talk to people, the people that I care about, and not being okay with reaching out for mentorship and connection. So those are things that have been keeping me sustained.
On my end, I would say that I like to spend time alone. I really value my time alone. And what I do on my time, on my personal time, is I love to read. I love to take myself to the movies and take myself to dinner just by myself. It allows me to sit with my thoughts and sort of, gather myself and ground myself if I'm ever experiencing a very hectic week or a hectic month, which is, most often. And what I invest in my personal time, I read literature that I don't typically read on a daily basis. Sometimes when I read literature that's very dense and very intense, with what it is that it's reporting or it is what's covering, I try to take myself out of reading that sort of material and engaging more in poetry, and nonfiction, to make sure that I, in a way, bring in a sense of fantasy, and a different way of perceiving the world. Because if I am constantly on a tunnel vision of work, 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 and this is what I have to do, and this is what I must do for my community, and this is, the things that I must do, I deplete myself. And I am fully aware that if I am depleted, I cannot give the love and attention that my community requires, especially during this time in which there is so much anti-trans rhetoric. There are times in which I leave work emotionally drained and exhausted because there's so much that one must battle through. So I have been paying close attention to how I am feeling and making sure that I am able to address that, whether it is by engaging in personal time, exercising, meditating, or just speaking to family members, which always helps.
All of that is like great, and like some of what y'all do, I'd also do as well. And I'm gonna be honest that as soon as we wrap our workshop today, I'm definitely taking a nap, because that's key. I'm a team nap ministry person. And I also want to highlight, and I know when I turn this back over to Ben, he'll probably reiterate this. It's been said in the chat. You probably saw some questions. I want you to submit your questions, because so many of the questions that I saw today need time to marinate on. We need that time to go back as like a collective and a staff to think about. Also, our contact information has been shared and is there for you all to reach out directly to us if you have questions, even if you aren't going to be part of our upcoming workshops. And I know the staff is going to talk more about this, but I personally, as your panel moderator, want to encourage you to continue to have these conversations, continue to work within your communities. Hold on, like know when to make that balance and everything, to give up or move on. And then also to knowing that we live in a nation of states, and different states have different grant opportunities, different laws, different zonings. And so definitely we're on a national conversation today, but definitely I want to encourage you all to definitely have these conversations at your state and civic levels. And so at this point, I'm going to turn this back over to Ben to conclude us, and for anyone else on the SGA staff to give us some more announcements.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you also to Benny and Jupiter. That was really fantastic. I know it's always a sign of a good panel when I'm trying to listen into you all and my phone and my chat are blowing up with all the people I know who are listening and telling me how much they love hearing what you all have to say. So thank you everybody who blew up my inbox and my texts about that as we were listening to that wonderful, great little panel we just had.